Hello, and welcome back to the Carbon Capture Magazine podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Piekarski, and today I am joined by two special guests, Tom Buis and Collin Peterson of the American Carbon Alliance. Thank you both for joining me on the podcast today. We're excited to have you here.
Glad to be with you.
Great to be here.
So let's start things off by having you both tell us a bit about your background. Tom, would you like to start first?
Yeah, well, my background begins on a farm in Indiana. I grew up on a farm. I farmed full-time in partnership with my brother for 20 years before going to Washington, D.C. And I had a friend that got elected to the House Ag Committee at the time. It was in the midst of the farm crisis. And he said, "Why don't you come out and help me resolve this issue?" And, naively, I kind of thought, we solve all the world's problems at the coffee shop every day over breakfast. This won't take long. Well, 30 years later, I retired from out there after having spent 7 years in the House, 7 and working in the Senate for Tom Daschle of South Dakota. And then I went over to Farmers Union and I ran their Washington office. And then I ultimately became their president. And then there was this issue called food versus fuel that popped up, and the folks in the ethanol industry felt that we needed to get out there and address that issue, even though it made no sense. We didn't produce ethanol from any type of the food products, canned corn, sweet corn, candy corn, or popcorn. We produced it out of number 2 yellow corn. And so we created this entity called Growth Energy. I was their first CEO, and I retired from that position about 7 years ago, and I'm still on their board of directors.
Great, thank you. And we'll move on to you next, Collin.
Okay, yeah. So I also grew up on a farm and started farming when I was a kid. And my dad always said, well, you can be a farmer, but I want you to get an education. So I went off and went to school and got my accounting degree and became a CPA. For different reasons, I ended up having my own CPA firm when I was 22 years old. And I did that for a while, had mostly farm clients. And then when I was 30 years old, I decided I got talked into running for the state Senate. So I got elected to the state Senate in Minnesota, spent 10 years there. And then eventually spent 30 years in Washington in Congress. During that period of time, I worked on farm issues, both in the Minnesota Senate and in Congress. I was chairman of the House Ag Committee twice. I was the head Democrat on the committee for 16 years. And during that time, I was also one of the main supporters of ethanol, because I saw what a positive force this could be for agriculture. And so I helped, I wrote the financing law to set up the first ethanol plant in Minnesota that was funded by that, and worked on all the issues over the years, worked with Tom on in his role at Farmers Union and Growth Energy. And, it's been a huge success story, and we wouldn't have the kind of prices we have on the farm if it weren't for ethanol. And now with this effort to try to go to EV vehicles, which I don't think is going to happen like they think, we have to look at other uses for ethanol, and that's where this Carbon Alliance comes in, because we've been given an unfair carbon score. And, we got to get that carbon score down so we can take part in the sustainable aviation fuel and so forth. And so that's why this alliance is important. It's going to be probably the most important things in terms of profitability of agriculture going forward. And a lot of people in rural America don't even realize it's an issue. So that's why I'm involved in this, and I'm happy to be part of it.
Thank you. So let's just expand on the American Carbon Alliance. Can you tell us a bit about the mission and when it was formed?
The whole mission of the American Carbon Alliance is, I think there's a lot of people out there talking about the negatives of capturing carbon and storing it in the ground. And not many people are talking about the positives. And, you know, rural America is kind of at a crossroads, especially in the Midwest, on how we get to keep profitability on the farm. As Collin mentioned, ethanol was really the story that turned around the supply and demand. Prior to the ethanol industry, we had these huge oversupplies that overhang the market and depress the prices. And ethanol created a new secure domestic demand. Well, now we're kind of at a point in time where if we don't move forward on increasing our demand, because we produce more corn every year, the yields keep going up because farmers are the most efficient producers in the world. If you want something produced, give it to a farmer, they'll do it well, and they'll do more than you need. Well, we got to have markets, and one of the potential markets is next generation fuels. And the obviously carbon capture allows us to be able to be part of the feedstock to produce those fuels, whether it's sustainable aviation fuel or hydrogen fuel or, you know, advanced fuels at the pump. Everything's based on this carbon score that Collin mentioned, which has agriculture's been treated unfairly in the past. But there are ways that we can get down to where we qualify, and qualifying is really important. So that's why we put it together. It's broad. We want everybody involved. We didn't start this organization to compete with any other trade group or any farm group or anyone else. We want to do it in a collaborative effort where everybody is talking about the benefits. You can't just talk about the negatives. You can't just talk about stuff that may or may not be true and that's going around about the carbon issue. You have to base it on the facts. And we think if rural America understands those benefits, not just to ethanol, but also to farmers, to those rural communities that want to keep their community viable, then this is the answer.
Yeah, this morning, Tom Vilsack, the Ag Secretary, was talking about in the press about how important it was to recognize carbon as something that's going to provide some profitability to the farm in a number of different ways. And the farm, as I said before, the farmers really have not heard about this. So we set up this 501c6, which is it's a nonprofit that allows you to advocate behalf of causes, for example, agriculture and farmers and carbon, to go out and educate people about this and get them to understand why this is important and how this can affect their bottom line going forward. In fact, in some cases, it's going to mean the difference about whether they're profitable or not. So this is a huge education effort, but the government is behind what we're trying to do here. They also want to educate people. They want to store carbon. They want to get carbon out of the system. And this is just one way to do it, with carbon sequestration. There's other ways to go about this. They're longer term, and we're about all of the ways to try to decarbonize, the economy in America. So this is an educational outfit that we put together. As Tom said, we're going to have a lot of folks involved in this that maybe don't have any direct impact, but they're going to, if they're in rural America and in agriculture, it's going to affect them. And so we want to have everybody in agriculture involved in this, and we're working on doing that now.
In May is when we started putting this thing together, and myself and Nick Ryan, a businessman from Iowa, and Collin. And, as far as Collin, I couldn't think of anyone better to get that message out there. He's a little too modest, but he was such a champion for all of rural America in every farm bill. And people know him, they respect him, and there's no better source of getting this information to farmers than Collin Peterson. So that's how we kind of got started. We're in the process of expanding it on a daily basis. We were talking to literally everybody who has a stake in this to get them to be a part of it.
Well, you sound like a great team. So speaking of rural America, let's talk a bit about how CCS project development benefits rural Americans and what role ethanol and sustainable aviation fuel and other forms of renewable energy play in that.
Well, the sustainable aviation fuel component is really exciting because worldwide you're probably talking a market of 100 billion gallons. They can make sustainable aviation fuel out of a number of different feedstocks, but the cheapest feedstock and most readily available, where you already have an industry in place and you can store it, you can transport it, is ethanol. And so getting that into the marketplace through the carbon capture program is vital to rural America. And, I think it's the difference between farmers making a profit or not making a profit into the future. Collin?
Yeah, and so as I said earlier, we were saddled with this system where they're scoring the carbon of ethanol based on, I forget what the name of it is, but we don't agree with the method that they've used. And under the way they're scoring this stuff, if you're above 50 on the carbon index, you don't qualify for these new sustainable fuels and renewable fuels. And ethanol is at 60. Now there's this GREET model that's out there, and we have had introduction in Congress to try to force EPA to use the GREET model. But that's, in the system, and whether it's ever going to get done or not is a question. But the sequestration that we're working on would give ethanol the ability to take the carbon dioxide off of the plant and reduce their carbon score from 60 to 30. And then once that happens, then that feedstock becomes available for these huge markets like sustainable aviation fuel. Tom said it's going to be 100 billion gallons. Well, we're producing 15 billion gallons of ethanol, which would be feedstock for this. So you can see the growth potential that's there in just in that one area. And then you got people working on renewable diesel fuel and, these other advanced biofuels that we could also be part of. So the first thing we got to do is get that carbon score down to where it fits within the system. And, we've been fighting this, trying to change this model for years and haven't gotten any place. Well, this is the way that we can make this happen. And as I say, USDA is in favor of what we're doing, and the government's in favor of what they've made carbon worth enough money, so it's now profitable to be able to get this out of the system and store it underground. So that's what we're trying to get across to people, that the method is there, the way we can do this is there. We just have to get people all behind it and make it happen.
And that's always the tough part. So of these different forms of renewable energy, how do they relate to America's energy independence and increasing it?
Well, I'll go first. Collin and I are roughly the same age. He looks a lot better than I do, but we're about the same age, growing up in the farms. But we both remember the days when we sat in gas lines because we had an Arab oil embargo, and they forced America to really start to think about what are we going to do into the future. And when this occurred, and this was in the 70s, powers to be in Washington at that time said we need to start looking at alternatives. And one of the alternatives that they looked at was ethanol, which was not a new product. I mean, Henry Ford called it farm gas back when he was providing it for the Model Ts, et cetera. And we started to see more interest in doing an alternative. And if you flash forward to today, and as Collin just mentioned, we produce about 15 billion gallons of environmentally friendly, consumer-friendly ethanol here in the United States, not overseas. We don't have to import it. And you combine that with the renewable diesel and other components, and we've made a huge dent in our reliance on foreign oil. And every amount that we can do going forward, that's just going to improve our plight. And it also, and this kind of relates back to your first question, it doesn't just benefit rural America, it benefits all Americans, for us to have low carbon, sustainable, domestically produced fuel.
And ethanol helped us to get to energy independence here a few years ago. But in the oil case, that's in worldwide market. And, you can't just fence off the United States. And so where the oil comes from somewhat depends on the price and the type of oil and so forth. So, we have the ability to be energy independent if we need to. And the reason for that is ethanol. Without that, there's no way we could achieve it. So it's been, really a great thing. It's great for the economy. It's great for the farm economy. It's great for the environment because, back when they first started pushing this, they called it a gasohol way back in the early 70s. Some buddies of mine they imported a Ford Fiesta from Brazil, and they were taking it around to the county fairs, and they would put up a tent, and they would drive the Fiesta into the tent. It was running on 100% ethanol, and they would bring the people in the tent and turn the car on and get them to understand that it was just basically putting off water vapor and CO2, which people could live with. At that time, carbon was not the problem that it is today. We didn't have the global warming and the carbon buildup and so forth back in the 70s that we're dealing with today. But we now have a way that we can deal with it, and it's economical. We can sequester it. We have some places where the ethanol plants are putting the CO2 from the plant right in the ground where the plant exists because of the formation underneath it. But other places it needs to be moved. And we have the technology, we have the support, and we just need to get everybody to understand that this is the future.
Collin just mentioned some ethanol plants are just putting it directly into the below the ground, including in North Dakota. And we've already seen this. And we also have some folks that are putting it in pipelines and delivering it. I think that's also from North Dakota into Canada. The process works. And the only thing that comes up that smokestack that you see in an ethanol plant is carbon and steam. And 99% of that is carbon. And we can easily capture it, compress it, and ship it to other parts of the country where it can be stored. And there's a lot of exciting projects out there, a lot of sustainable aviation fuel projects that want to use ethanol, as well as, people are talking about hydrogen and a lot of fuels for the future. And if you turn this over to rural America, they'll figure out how to make it economically and how to do it for the benefit of all of America.
All right, so we're coming near the end of our time here, but I did want to ask what the next steps are for the American Carbon Alliance. I know getting everyone on board is definitely a mission, but what are some more breakdown items for the organization to accomplish?
Well, I think obviously getting everyone into this alliance, and again, it's an alliance. It's not designed to compete with anyone, but between farmers and airline industry and oil and everyone that's got a stake in this, in cleaning our fuel, and whatever we can do to ensure that the fuels of the future are very clean, domestically based, we're going to do it, whether it's talking about safety issues or educating people about the economic benefits. That's kind of our goal. Again, critics like to talk about issues that aren't really factual based or relevant, but based on fear. We want people to make these decisions based on facts. And I think that's what you'll see out of us as we go forward. But we'll keep you in mind and keep you up to date on everything we do. We very much appreciate you taking time to talk to us.
Yeah, as Tom said, the first thing is getting people involved, signed up with this, and getting as broad a coalition as we can possibly get. But then the next mission is education. And as Tom said, there are people out there putting out misinformation, confusing folks. And part of our mission is going to be getting the right accurate information out to people, getting them to understand how it affects the economy and also how it affects the environment. And if we're going to clean this environment up, this is going to be a big part of why we're able to do it. So it's a big mission, but we didn't, like I say, we just got started.
All right. Is there anything else either of you would like to add before we end the podcast?
Danielle, I think we pretty well covered the waterfront, and we appreciate, again, your interest in talking to us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for doing this.
Yes, thank you. Again, today we are talking to Tom Buis and Collin Peterson of the American Carbon Alliance. And thank you to our listeners. If you or your company are interested in joining us on the podcast, please feel free to send us a message at Carbon Capture Magazine. Until next time.